Hello, and welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of having Dexter Zhuang on our podcast. Dexter reached out to me with a request to join the podcast, and it was a very compelling message. And it's a great example of how you can build relationships, and there's really no downside of reaching out to ask for things. And I got to know Dexter a little bit looking at his LinkedIn profile and emailing back and forth. But I'll have Dexter explain a little bit about who you are and what brought you to where you are today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alan, for first of all, responding to my email outreach. And second, for having me on this podcast. It's great to be here. So, a quick introduction for me. I'm Dexter. I'm the founder of Money Abroad, which is a online education platform that helps high performers design their own money path. My career journey is a little bit meandering, but it started over 10 years ago in San Francisco, where I graduated from college. When I graduated from college, I moved out to the Bay Area to join the tech industry. And that's where I started working for a Series A edtech startup as a marketer. I ended up getting a promotion about a year in to become a product manager for that startup, thanks to the support of my manager. And then I left about a year later to join Dropbox because I wanted to go somewhere where I could learn from a bigger team and work at a different kind of level of scale. And that's where I stayed for maybe another 3 to 4 years, learned a tremendous amount, and I credit working in that high performance team with a lot of my success that I've gotten in my career so far. I'm very grateful for the talented people I got to work with there. And then around 2019, I got burned out from the tech industry in San Francisco. I think you've probably heard of a number of people experiencing this. During that period of time, I was working nonstop from the time I had graduated. I think maybe a week after I graduated, I moved out to the Bay Area to start working and was working up until that point. I had put a couple of my life goals on hold. One of them was to work internationally. So I decided to actually explore that. I took a travel sabbatical, spent some time in Southeast Asia, Europe, South America, and decided that I'm going to move to Singapore and work in Southeast Asia, where I spent another 3 years working for a fintech startup that eventually became a unicorn in that region. Still doing product management, worked as a manager for a team and built my team from a couple of product managers to a team of about 10 and a group of about 70 cross-functionally. And after that, I decided with my wife that we wanted to spend some time learning Spanish. And so now we're actually in Mexico learning some Spanish and spending some time in the Latin American region while I'm still doing some consulting and working on Money Abroad. So that's
Nice.
a summary of my career so far.
That's amazing, and so many different areas to go here. And with Money Abroad, uh, you can probably articulate it better about like you're helping people to be more mindful with their money, or you communicate what you're doing with Money Abroad.
Absolutely. Money Abroad started off as a newsletter that was money for expats. So I started that in January of last year and grew to over 6,000 subscribers now and was recognized by LinkedIn Top Voice and FinCon and other media outlets. And the newsletter evolved now to become more of a online education focus to help professionals with navigating more of a transition of going from live to work to live in their professional lives and also outside of their professional lives, and using money as a means to support that kind of transition.
And I love that. The way I've used money in my career is I've wound up like saving up a lot early on, thinking for retirement at one point. But then that money gave me the optionality to start Kadima because I was actually able to
Exactly.
draw down some of my savings that I had for retirement after discussing with my wife, not doing it single handedly, even though it wasn't my 401k. I could technically take it out on my own. But that use of money provides lots of options. And I'd be curious your
100%.
perspective on that as you're working with people. And do you consult people? Do you advise people? I know you have 6,000 people in your newsletter, but how do you help inform people and help them take action to be more mindful and conscientious with their money?
Absolutely. So the newsletter and the content are deep dives and guides. So those do contain some how-to type articles that help people make that answer some of their questions around, okay, what are some types of alternative work? What are some alternatives beyond, for example, early retirement, which I think a lot of people have heard of the FIRE movement and how you can retire by 40. There's also the more traditional retirement of, okay, you work and climb the corporate career ladder until 65 and then you retire. But nowadays there's more optionality, and I think it's because of a few different factors. So one is obviously social trends like post-COVID. I think people have more awareness of their lifestyle needs and caring about taking care of their family time and lifestyle. And the second thing is also work trends. So employers are also more open to different employment models than earlier. So they're more open to things like fractional work or part-time work. Remote work is definitely a contentious point, but if we look at the data, it's still at a higher elevated rate post-COVID than pre-COVID. So that's still arguably here to stay. And then the last trend is technology shifts. So now with the rise of AI, I know there's a lot of fear around these kind of technology shifts and what that means for employment. But I actually see that as a positive trend because it opens up the door for individual employees who are ambitious to be able to do more leverage work and do it for this goal of work to live.
But so, what advice do you give people? So, yeah, we have a changing world. We have AI and new realities. People are retiring at different ages, and people don't have pensions or they have 401k. So, what do you advise people to do?
So in the content itself, there's one set of examples of case studies, like people who pursue alternatives, for example, fractional work. I have a couple case studies of people who are full-time fractionals who have built what is now called a portfolio career, where they have not just one full-time role that they're juggling, but multiple income sources, doing a combination of consulting for clients and advising clients. Granted, like these are a bit more senior professionals. One example is Mark Wolinix. He worked at Amex doing loyalty for a number of years, and then he is now a fractional head of strategy for various startups who are interested in developing kind of loyalty programs or leveraging his expertise in that area. Another example is Eric Sims, who was a former managing director at UBS and then transitioned to doing more career coaching for professionals, and doing that in combination with publishing his book, becoming an author, doing speaking, and having a number of income sources coming in. What is a common kind of denominator that I've seen for folks who are pursuing these portfolio careers is that they did start building out potentially a side hustle or experimented at least with building out their own ventures while they were working full time as well. And through that experimentation, then validated whether or not, one, did they even like doing that kind of thing? Did they even enjoy having multiple kind of careers or income sources and managing that? And then two, was that feasible for them? Did they have the skill set and capabilities to do it? So I have a cohort of busy professionals who are looking to build a service-based side hustle, and being able to use that to experiment and validate whether or not they can develop and grow that service.
What's the advantage of doing a portfolio career or a side hustle than getting the stability and comfort of working for a stable company?
Definitely. I think there's definitely pros and cons to the approach. And I don't think that one is a one size fits all for like a vast majority of people. It's more dependent upon what you value in your career. So in my career, I always go back to values, and how I make decisions is really predicated upon my top values. For example, one of my top values is around curiosity and being able to explore my curiosities within my career, whether it's a portfolio career or my full time role. Second is more around freedom, and then being able to more having freedom around my time and schedule. That's what I care a bit more about. So those are some examples of values that I have seeked out in my full time roles, as well as the portfolio career kind of path. But I would say pros and cons wise, the portfolio career gives a bit more flexibility in terms of your time and your schedule, and then being able to take control of that time on your being able to manage that on your own terms, versus of course the income stability is way better for a full-time role. So if you're looking for a regular kind of monthly income that is dependable every month, then a full-time income is excellent for that. Whereas a portfolio career is more if you're looking for that time independence or a potential location independence. If you're also looking to leverage flexibility around where you're located while you're doing the work.
Yeah. On the flexibility side, I'm curious about that because as an entrepreneur, and for a while I had a portfolio career because I was working at Salesforce and simultaneously running Kadim careers. And I did some other consulting work as well. So I had a portfolio career plus raising
Yeah,
kids and all that stuff.
that's a career
It
as well.
it was it was a lot more flexible and a lot more comfortable when I just held one job. When I just knew that I was going to American Express every day or Tableau or Salesforce when it was going well. So I actually found that I had more flexibility in my full-time job than I do sometimes in a portfolio career because you're on the hook. You are
Mm.
always trying to sell some product or service and either try to acquire new customers or keep existing customers. So I found it, like my limited experience in it, more challenging and less flexible.
That's fascinating. And that makes a lot of sense. Look, I think there's definitely a point that I'll say a portfolio career is something that's not glamorous and it's not easy, similar to what you would also see in a entrepreneurial kind of career. As a founder, you're going to have to sell, and the business that comes in is based on what you sell, and in a portfolio career, it's very similar. And I think it isn't a super simple, okay, I'm going to get a portfolio career and then I'm going to have all the time in the world. No, you're still going to be on the hook for selling to clients and building your personal brand, whatever it may be. If you're like a fractional head of strategy, great. Fractional head of growth, great. But you have to build a brand around that to really help drive your client acquisition. And that I do see examples of professionals who have reached a certain level of their portfolio career, but they now have that flexibility and they have the multiple income sources coming in, and that works for them. But it definitely took a lot of work for them to get there.
Yeah. And it looks like, so you had two big stints in your career where you were at Dropbox and Zendit. Like I haven't heard of Zendit, but I think that's a mid-size or large company.
Zenit was a YC backed fintech startup in Singapore that eventually became a fintech unicorn. Now it's a unicorn in that region. It is a payment processing company. So you can imagine it like a Stripe for Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And it transacts in tens of billions of transaction volume.
Cool. So looking back at your career, so at Dropbox, you were there for 4 years, Zendit, you were there for 3 years, and that's like a more traditional non-portfolio career.
Yep.
Are there things that you miss about that, or are you just like for your lifestyle and values, just this is like a no-brainer for you? Are there some regrets that you have or some things that you miss?
Definitely. So I would say the things that I miss are definitely the interactions with a close team where I get to work with my immediate teammates and then build these relationships in an office environment. That was definitely my highlight of my experience at Dropbox and also at Zendesk. I really enjoyed working with a tight knit team and then being able to get to know them as people and then also really feel the kind of energy of where you're building something together as a group. And when I talk to other people in a more entrepreneurial path, whether they're a founder or whether they're building a portfolio career and consulting with clients, they tend to also say similar things where they wish they could have more people work with, whether it's in their own business or whether it's working with other people in a similar kind of stage and being able to share their learnings with each other and help each other.
Nice. And so, what do you spend most of your time on now? You mentioned you're in Mexico learning Espanol. What do you spend most of your portfolio career on? What's a day in the life, or a week in the life, or a month in the life?
Definitely. So the way that I spend my time is typically we're spending some time in Mexico, and then we're also spending some time in the States, and then doing a bit of traveling, seeing family. So the schedule is a bit more variable, but typically on a week to week time frame, I'll be spending 3 of those days working with clients who are typically between Series A to C. They're in the fintech space or a SaaS space. So an example is I have a tech startup that is a YC backed tech startup who I am advising them on their courses and then on their product strategy. And what that means is then I have 2 days left to then work on Money Abroad, to write the newsletter, to build the content. And that gives me a bit more flexibility than to do both in a given week. The days themselves, in terms of when I'm working on what, are a bit more in flux. On a week to week basis, it changes, but generally it's about 50-50 at this point.
Cool. And I don't know if you want to share compensation or at least percentages, but if you look at like the time that you're spending, I'm assuming you need to earn money, right? Or do you earn enough during your working career that you don't need to earn money anymore?
No, I would say I'm more closer, not close to the early retirements, like a traditional kind of fire number. I'm not going to go into the different types of retirements, but I have achieved more of a semi-retirement, a place where I need to cover my costs and expenses. But in terms of the amount that I have, and if that can continue to grow itself as a portfolio, then that can eventually become the retirement runway in the future. So right now,
Wow.
my main focus is to earn income, to at a minimum cover my living costs and expenses. As an added bonus, of course, save and invest a portion of that. And in the future, my wife and I don't have kids yet, so that's obviously, as you mentioned, a big component of balancing the career versus the finance decisions. That's still TBD, depending upon when we have kids and when we decide we want that, then that will probably change the equation. But for now, that's the way it is. And I see consulting as still bringing in the majority of income, while Money Abroad brings in a smaller percentage of that. And my goal is to bring that to be more 50-50 over time.
Nice. So you've been fortunate enough to earn enough money in your life so far where you don't have to sock away a lot more going forward. It sounds like you're just like earning your keep essentially, or it sounds like you're closer to
There's
your retirement than most people.
Yes, so there's basically a term called coast fire. What this is, where you have saved up enough of a retirement kind of nest egg, assuming, of course, some projections around interest rates. So you're assuming that your nest egg contains stocks that are going to continue to grow at a 7% kind of interest rate over time, accounting for inflation, let's say 3% inflation. Then that's going to get you eventually to a retirement amount that you're happy with it when you're 65 or when you're 60
Right. So
or whatever you
you
want to
can
do
take
a
out like
traditional
four,
retirement.
and where you like take out 4% of it essentially and can live on that. Is that like the number typically?
Yes, exactly. And then at 65, then you can safely withdraw 4% a year, or you can decide what percentage you want that to be. For me, I'm thinking about it as a 4% withdrawal rate. And so what that enables me to do is just have a bit more flexibility, of course, in terms of what kind of income I'm looking to bring in from a single income source. So I can have a bit more room to say, okay, I'm going to experiment with, let's say, consulting and doing the consulting and seeing where it goes. If I was earlier in my career and I did not have that nest egg built and saved up over the last decade, then I would be making different decisions, which I did. For me, financial security was very important in my 20s. And so definitely worked very hard, both in the companies I worked for in San Francisco and then also in Singapore, working at Zendit as well. But I still want to put out there that I was able to navigate making an international job transition from the US to Singapore and still being able to save that amount without enormous sacrifices to quality of life. And I think that's possible for other professionals in their 20s as well to consider that there's multiple ways to navigate your career paths.
Yeah, totally. And it's great that you had that ability to travel abroad, which it's not, was it hard to get a visa in Singapore? Are you a US citizen?
Yes, I'm a US citizen and moving to Singapore in early 2020. I actually moved there right before COVID. During that period of time, there was a tech boom in the late 2010s, and that's what attracted me to spend time in Singapore and Southeast Asia because I saw, okay, there was actually a lot of momentum, like a tech ecosystem getting built there that seemed quite promising, even from a career perspective, not just for lifestyle reasons, but also from a career standpoint. I was really interested in working internationally, and I saw that there were some great companies that I could consider working with in that region. So the way the visa kind of process works when you try to move to a new country for work is obviously it's country by country. It can get complicated or it can be really simple depending on the country. For Singapore, there was a pretty established process called the employment pass process where they had a requirement for the minimum amount of income that you're required to be making. And typically, companies are the ones that need to submit an application on your behalf to the Singaporean government for that employment pass. And each company will have a certain amount of employment pass slots that they would consider internally that they're going to go to bat for a foreign candidate. It's tricky in some countries like Singapore where there's some foreigners moving there for work, but then also a lot of local professionals. And there's different roles available for foreigners because they require visas. So you have to really take into consideration which employers to talk to because some of them might have visas available for foreigners, some of them may not. And the only way to find out is actually by talking to that hiring manager, having that conversation, and then getting feedback early on in the process. Or you can talk to the recruiter. So what I did was I started having the conversations with the recruiters and hiring managers very early in the process. And I would ask, is this role even open to foreigners in the first place? And then they would say yes or no.
Did you explore at all the opportunity of moving internally at Dropbox? Because I'm sure they had Singapore headquarters. A lot of the big tech companies do.
Yes. So I did look at what was available internally at Dropbox, and there were roles available in some international offices. And I know several kind of colleagues who took advantage of that. So that's definitely an option, which is quite exciting for a professional who can get a job at a great company like Dropbox and then can also navigate internally to switch offices. Like I know someone who worked in I think the business development team who then moved to the Sydney office from San Francisco and helped start the Sydney office. That's very exciting. For my role in particular, because I was in product management and growth, there wasn't any roles that were international, like outside of the US offices at
Yeah,
that point in time. Mainly San Francisco and New York were the
right.
offices available for the tech functions. So I looked internally for like other roles that were exciting, but unfortunately the international offices were not available for me at that point in time.
Yeah, it's probably mostly like sales, I would imagine, in the Singapore office, sales and operations,
Exactly.
maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's definitely sales. So if you're a salesperson listening to this,
yeah,
then definitely look internally and you want to move abroad, then definitely look internally at international offices before you look externally, because that's an excellent way to make a transition while staying in a company that you are excited about, while you are also getting a comparable kind of compensation package.
yeah. Like sales support, customer success, roles that are serving the local markets. Like that's where I spend a lot of my space. Not in product management, it's usually focused in the headquarters or like in a couple of offices, whereas the sales support and ops can be like have to be in the market often because they need to serve those markets.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, in Dropbox, there was a Sydney office that had a lot of sales, some customer success, and some operations. So that matches up pretty well.
Yeah. Awesome, Dexter. We're closing in on time, so want to ask you a couple more questions. One, what is some sick career advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about as they manage their careers?
Absolutely. So, what if you're someone who is listening to this and you're interested in building a career internationally, whether it's moving to Asia or somewhere else, maybe moving to Europe for work, we talked a little bit about making that transfer internally, and that's one great option. And if you can't find a great role internally, then another outlet that I would suggest is to definitely build relationships with people in the industry that are local to where you want to go.
Yeah.
So, in my case, when I was looking to relocate to Singapore, I identified who are the super connectors in the tech ecosystem in Singapore. I spent time reaching out to those people. Those people tended to be either community builders or investors in the region. I also reached out to people who were like me, moving from the US to Singapore. So I was able to find people who made that transition. And you can do this using tools like LinkedIn to find those people. I also found people who were in my role within Singapore. And I connected with those people, and that was very valuable to give me a lot more context around what working in Singapore tech was actually like, and what were the opportunities that people were seeing on the ground, and even giving me some insight into data points around things that are traditionally more opaque, like compensation. So that's why I really strongly recommend for someone looking to make that kind of international transition to build those relationships with people on the ground, talk to them. The second piece of advice I'll share is that when you're moving to a new market, for example, if you're working in tech and you're a salesperson and you're looking to move to that new market, typically the people that are working locally will be a bit more skeptical of, hey, are you really serious about actually moving here, or are you just joking around? Like, how can I take you seriously? So that was definitely one of the questions that I would get as an international candidate. And the reality is that they have good reason to ask, because a lot of people aren't serious. So you have to showcase you're serious by doing a few things, like one, having a compelling story for why you're looking to move to that location. So in my case, I was really excited about actually spending a number of years in Singapore and Southeast Asia and working in the tech industry. And that was something that I felt like my strengths also matched, that I could make a contribution to the companies there. And then the second thing was that I had to show up like face to face. I had to like actually go, and even if it was a virtual kind of interview process, I still had to make a point and ask the recruiter, hey, can we actually turn this from a virtual to an in-person interview? And I'm actually going to be in the city in this like week long time frame, and can we put the interviews in that time frame? And then I would just like stack interviews so that I could be able to take advantage of that one trip to meet everyone. And that was
Wow.
really helpful, because if I didn't do that, I don't think I would have gotten any job offers, or at least not the ones that I wanted.
And that was back in pre-COVID, like 2019 or so?
That was actually early 2020. So I was interviewing when COVID was just starting to spread in Asia. So I actually got some yeses to, hey, yeah, let's meet in person in Singapore. And then I would fly to Singapore. And then the hiring manager would say, oh, let's actually just do a virtual chat because COVID is now spreading in Singapore. So it was actually right around that time.
So you traveled all the way there to take a video chat?
Yeah, for some of the roles, yeah, some of the roles
Yeah.
met in person.
Cool. And I do want to just go back quickly. So you build relationships with folks here. And I'd imagine, like, how did you do it? Because the way you got on this podcast, you wrote a very compelling email to me that was very concise. I'll just read a couple of key highlights here. You wrote the email: I'm Dexter, founder of Money Abroad, an online education platform, helping high performers design an independent money path. And then you said nice things about my podcast. And then you said, who am I? And then what I can offer your audience and why my podcast. And you made it very succinct. And anybody who wants to get that email, I'll forward it to you, or probably Dexter will too. But it was a really effective email. So I'm imagining, was that a big part of your approach in building the outreach to get into the Singapore market?
Yes, that's a great point, Alan. I didn't have relationships in Singapore before I made the transition there. I didn't have family there. I have some family in China, but not in Singapore. And I knew of maybe two or three friends and friends of friends who were there. So I definitely asked them for help to make some introductions to people who they thought would be interesting to me in terms of my goals. But I sent a bunch of cold emails and cold DMs as well. And the way I tried to write those were just a very concise version of, hey, I'm Dexter. This is my background, or this is my background. This is why I'm reaching out. For example, sometimes I would reach out to someone who was from San Francisco who now worked in Singapore. And I said, hey, it looks like you made a very similar transition to me. I'm actually looking to do exactly what you're doing now. And here's a quick one-liner about who I am, what my background is. Would you be open to chatting for 15 minutes? And that got a pretty high response rate, because I think people were really excited to connect with someone who were just like two steps behind them. And they were open to having that conversation.
And you found them through LinkedIn?
Yes, and I found that through LinkedIn mainly.
Yeah. And what sort of response rate do you think you had? Would you reach out to them on LinkedIn, email, both?
I think I did a combination of LinkedIn and email. I don't recall the differences in that response rate, but if I had to choose one or the other, I go with LinkedIn nowadays. So I prefer LinkedIn DMs. I think it gets higher open rate than emails, just because people's email inboxes seem more crowded than LinkedIn DMs. The quality of other messages that at least I'm getting in my LinkedIn DMs, and I'm sure you're getting too, Alan, are not very high. And so if I get a message from someone who is very earnest, for example, a college grad who is interested in how I made a certain career decision and is able to point to some very specific things and just ask one quick question, then I'll be very likely to respond to that, versus like now my LinkedIn DMs is mainly like sales pitches of like different products, right? I'm sure it's the same for you, Alan.
Yeah. Oh, totally. But it's interesting if someone asks you politely and refers to something personal about you and asks for advice, even though you're a busy dude and you have 22,000 followers or something like that on LinkedIn, you will likely reply.
Yes, absolutely. I would definitely, if I see a message that was very personable and it was a quick question, not a question that is, hey, can we chat for an hour or can we get on a call? There's a number of reasons why that's not a super great ask. But if it's a one liner, hey, I saw you talked about job transition, the Steer Your Career podcast. And you mentioned to talk to super connectors. Here's who I'm thinking about connecting with. What do you think? That would be something that would take me 2 minutes to respond. And why wouldn't I?
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's led to lots of your success, not just getting on the Steer Your Career podcast with a well written email. So you could have got me on either way. And it was a compelling enough email for me to read. But thank you, Dexter. That was really interesting, and understanding like how you've gone the corporate career, you've gone the portfolio career, entrepreneurship. A lot of that is through building relationships with people that are already there to get some
100%.
insight and advice, and probably open some doors for you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think building relationships is a key part, no matter if you're building a portfolio career or a
Yeah,
full time career.
cool. Very last question I'll ask you. And we went off on a tangent because usually it's a quick one on the advice, but that was such good advice that I dug really deep into there in terms of the career advice. But now the last question, and I think I know the answer from that previous one. How can people find you, support you, follow your work?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't believe time has flown by so quickly. You can find me on my website, which is moneyabroad.co. And you can always email me. I'll leave my email with Alan. It's dexter@moneyabroad.co, or my LinkedIn as well.
Awesome, Dexter. Thanks a lot. We have a lot in similarities. I learned a lot from you, and you confirmed a lot of my hypothesis that relationships work, different sort of careers work. Also, I think you were very conscientious about that money and that goal, and how that money helps you to achieve your career path. Thanks a lot for reaching out to me with such a compelling email.
And thanks for having me, Alan. It takes two to tango, so I appreciate you to respond and to have me here. I had a wonderful chat.
Thanks, Dexter.
Awesome. Thank you.